And so, again, gathered here today is Charlie Fokkens and myself, Carrie Tousignant. So we're from IMC and the EAL team. And our hope is that we're able to really go through some silent reading practices so that it's not just our students maybe sitting and reading and we're unsure of what they're taking in. But of course, gathering here today, we are supporting our district's board priority of student success by learning about and creating optimal student-centered learning and assessment practices. But not only do we as teachers program to support success in our students, but we're also mandated by Alberta Education through the teaching quality standards to provide appropriate programming for the success of all the students that we teach. And hopefully we'll give you a few tips and tricks today in how to do that. And just before we get started, let's just do a quick check-in. How are you feeling today? And so as some of you may have heard when you joined, we are definitely animal lovers on this call. And so there are a whole bunch of dogs here in a variety of emotional states. And you can see that there are some sentence frames to the right of those pictures. And I hope you can take a time just to think to yourself, how am I feeling? And I'll tell you, when I arrive at work, I am definitely a solid number 4 dog. Maybe by the end of the day, I'm a solid 7 dog. And so I hope you fall somewhere in there. And I know we're nearing the end of our workday. I'm hoping you're moving to that number 4, number 3, number 2 there. And so our hope today is, again, that we're going to go over some research, some silent reading facts, but then also dive into some reading routines, some post-reading tasks, and then we're going to present some thinking routines that come from Project Zero that many of you may have heard of, and we've linked all of these different resources in this presentation. So when we send it out to you, you'll be able to click and be able to take some time to check out some of the resources. And then of course, we always, want to have a few classroom management strategies. And we're so lucky to have Charlie here that can tell us about all the great IMC resources that can support this as well. And so I'm going to turn it over to Charlie. And she's going to be chatting about why silent reading is so hard for some students and what some of the research says.
Awesome. So if it sounds like I am reading something very small, it's because my computer died, so I'm reading off my phone, but we should be good here. And I think that there's I don't know, at least a number of people that I think ask why is it so hard just to sit and read? Because at least for me, it's so enjoyable to sit and read. So it is a large question. I think there's a lot of answers to it. But one way of understanding this is to think about students' enjoyment of reading, their ability to sit and read for sustained periods of time. And that's kind of where I've based this research on. So Carrie, I'll get you to go to the next slide there. So one of the research I guess studies that I was looking at is Common Sense Media's. It's a very fantastic study. Unfortunately, it is from 2014, and I believe that most of the pieces were from the US. So there's only kind of one graph that I'm going to touch on here, but I think it's just kind of an interesting reflection. So I'll get you to post the next one there. So in this chart, it's kind of showing how student reading, and I'm pretty sure this is self-reported student reading, has changed since 1984. So the kind of darker green line is from 1984 versus the lighter green in 2012. And there's a whole lot to pull out of this specific study, but One thing is just to see that obviously it has reduced over time. I think that that's not a surprise to anyone here, that students are reading less, especially in a digital age. I think there's a lot of things to take attention, and I don't necessarily think that this is like absolutely detrimental to our society, that we like raise it back up to where it was in 1984. But just to know that that reading has decreased. Next slide, please. So one of the, sorry, my pieces are moving back and forth. So one of the studies that I found from Canada specifically is from Scholastic. And they do a report every year that's specific to Canada, and in 2024 is the kind of most recent one. So that's actually one that I will focus more on today, even though it doesn't have like a good comparison of how this has changed over time. So next slide there. So the first chart I wanted to look at is just like the frequency of Canadian students reading. And if, this is just the number of readers who've said that they are frequent readers, defined as 5 to 7 days per week they read. It's probably also not surprising that the younger students are, the more they're reading. I think that's just part of kind of how we engage with reading with students. But I did think that it was actually surprising to look at those older grades, so the junior high and the senior high children in this study, that, you know, they've got about 25% of them that are reporting that they are 5 to 7 days per week readers. That's a quarter of students. And to me, that was actually very surprising that we do have that many frequent readers. And I'll go to our next slide. So one question I think gets asked by teachers, parents, and public in general is just whether students even like reading. And I think it's probably easy to presume that they don't if they're not behaving well in your classroom while they're reading, if they're not able to kind of sit down and do that. And I think that there's a lot of pressure, I think, on teachers to feel like you have to convince kids to like reading. But at least according to this survey, you know, we've got well over 50% of students saying that they at least like it, or sorry, like it a lot, versus love it. They didn't say how many students particularly say they hate it or kind of in between or anything. But, you know, like I think that from this, it's pretty safe to assume that probably most of our students do enjoy reading to some extent for fun. And I'll get you to go to the next slide. And another sentiment might be that, okay, well, maybe they like reading, but maybe not necessarily in school. Like there's too many distractions. It's not really what they want to be doing. And that could be true, but I think that there are a lot of really good benefits to making sure that the independent reading is happening in school, especially because for some students, you know, the distractions actually are out of school. Like they have a lot of freedom, maybe they have a lot of screen time. You know, there's a lot of variables outside of school that that might make it hard to make this time for independent reading. And at least this study found that kids who read independently at school are more likely to find reading important, enjoy reading, read more frequently. And 60% of kids from 6 to 17 said that they wish they would do it more often, or it's one of their favorite parts of their day. I'll get to the next one. So while this may not be a sentiment that you necessarily hear in the older grades, you might hear it quite a bit in the elementary grades, depending on the class you have. But the survey results here do demonstrate that many of your students likely actually are enjoying reading in their classroom, whether or not they're saying it to you. And you may think that from here, you know, the ages 12 to 14 and 15 to 17, you've only got 44% and 37% saying, I wish we would do this more often. But you also have to think about, you know, if this is the study we have, there might be people who think like, no, we actually do it quite a bit, and that's good. Or there might be students who think, well, I'm too busy to be independently reading at school. And I think that that's something worth tackling as well. I'll go to the next one here, and I think this last one is my last slide here of charts anyways. So why are students not doing the independent reading? Why can't you just sit them in class, and why don't they open their book and enjoy that time that they're given? One major reason for that might be just of what I guess what the average time is in reading. So if you look at this chart here, this is just what students say how long they're reading for. And of course, you can see that it's more and more time the older students get. But even then, like most of the students are saying that they're only reading for less than 20 minutes at a time, or 20 to 59 minutes. And that's a huge chunk, that 20 to 59 minutes. My guess is that, especially with how large the section is of those that read less than 20 minutes, my guess is most of them, when they do read, it's probably not for longer than the 45-minute mark. So on to the next slide. So I do have just a little bit more here, just some of the psychology around maybe how long students are reading and how they're reading. And some of this is a little bit pop psychology. So there's people who kind of argue against pieces, parts of it. But I do want to bring up that, that there are at least things that are being researched right now. So Gloria Mark, who's a psychologist at UC Irvine in the States there, she at least claims that she's found that the average global attention span has dropped from 2.5 minutes in 2004 to 47 seconds in the last 5 to 6 years. And she attributes this to technology and social media. I think this is like a pretty big sentiment right now, that there's kind of this attention economy, that it's hard to keep kids' attention for more than a few minutes at a time. We've also got Nicholas Carr, who's a journalist, who argues that it's not a reduction in attention span, but rather a change in how we read. So people are more used to very short bursts of attention switching. So going, like, I know just for myself anyways, like I'll go between news sources and like read 5 different articles, but not truly deeply read them. I'm kind of bouncing between them. If one catches my interest, I might go a bit more into it. But there's less of this deep reading with no distractions, that you're actually kind of taking in what you read. On to the next slide there. So 2 last pieces here. Ziming Liu, who's from San Jose State University, found that there's this kind of new norm of reading in the pattern, like of skimming in the pattern of kind of like an F shape or a Z pattern, like kind of reading that first line and then skimming by a bunch of them, and then maybe half reading the line and skimming as you go. And then Marianne Wolf argues that switching from reading books to digital reading has inherently changed why we read. And she would argue that digital resources encourage us to take in as much information as we can, but at the cost of comprehension and apathy. So again, while there's kind of debate around some of these findings, I think that, you know, it's not that they're like completely unreliable information, but I think people attribute some of that that attention to different things. But I think there's a large amount of people who do, or at least are starting to agree, that the amount of information that students are receiving has made it harder for them to, you know, sit down and really take in what they are reading at a deeper level. So, you know, I think the silent reading piece needs to be taken as something that maybe needs to be trained a little bit more with our students. And that's something that, you know, like if a student cannot sit down and read for 45 minutes, it's not necessarily just that student's problem. It's probably that they're displaying behavior, but other students are also maybe having trouble with focusing for that amount of time. And I came across a quote the other day from a different book called Stolen Focus. And the kind of author says, we have this obligation to help students regain their focus, to help them slow down in a world that is speeding up. You know, I think that it's very easy as teachers to really have that go, go, go mentality. And I think that silent reading really provides that opportunity to slow down and to think about what's in front of you, whether that's for enjoyment or for learning. So next slide there, and I think that this is where I'm actually passing it on to Carrie.
Yeah, and if we kind of look at the area of language acquisition, specifically when students are immersed in their language that they're acquiring, students will begin by experiencing success within their listening and speaking skills, and then they apply these skills to acquiring reading and writing skills. The more a student's able to speak about their reading or writing, the more they're able to create connections to their prior learning, and then also being able to then build up that background knowledge to propel them forward in their learning. So when students have the opportunity to read at their appropriate reading level, it supports their comprehension, increasing their exposure, and also success with interacting with everyday academic and subject-specific vocabulary. And if those sound familiar, it's because really they're coming from our language outcomes, our language benchmarks. And reading also regularly builds that reading stamina that Charlie was just talking about. And so reading helps students make connections to their prior knowledge and also building up that background knowledge needed to now successfully interact within the classroom activities that we're presenting to them. And we also have to consider a student's culture and how this may impact learning styles and classroom activities they are being asked to complete. And so I know we're all very familiar with this beautiful image of a tree, and this is an image that Zaretta Hammond uses to represent the three levels of culture. And again, the top part of the tree, that crown, represents that surface culture, which would include aspects of culture that are easily observable, like food and music and stories. And then that trunk of the tree, that middle area, represents the shallow culture, the unspoken rules within a culture. And these aren't necessarily observable. So things like the concept of time, eye contact, personal space, nonverbal communications, even practices in how people raise their children. And then that deep culture is represented in the roots of the tree. These are the collective unconscious beliefs and norms of that culture. So concepts such as spirituality, relationship with self, and notion of fairness. And so the concepts of silent reading, active participation, questioning the teacher, and critically thinking, these are all ideas that live in that shallow and deep culture. And some students may not understand or even ever had experience with the concept of silent reading or understand the skills needed to participate in that skill. So silent reading classes really are a great opportunity to teach the purpose of silent reading, how it can be done, really the step-by-step of talking through with students what they should be doing, thinking in their mind, questions they are asking themselves as they read. And so this quote by Marianne Wolf, we should be less concerned with students' cognitive impatience, however, than by what may underline it, the potential inability of large number of students to read with a level of critical analysis sufficient to comprehend the complexity of thought and argument found in more demanding texts, whether in literature and science, in college, or in wills, contracts, and the deliberately confusing public referendum questions citizens encounter in the voting booth. So this quote really highlights the importance of reading skills not only in academics, but also in everyday life experiences. As students move into adulthood, reading is involved in understanding signing a loan, reading the terms of a mortgage or a rental agreement, signing a work contract, and registering your children for school. And these are just a few examples of lived experiences where it's really important for students to be able to understand that reading is important. And possibly due to past experiences, students may say, you know, I don't like reading, but reading really is essential to living an equitable lifestyle in the future for our students. And I'm just going to turn it back over to Charlie, who's going to chat about some reading routine strategies.
Yeah, so here we are kind of course, recognizing the importance of silent reading, and I'm hoping most people probably have seen that, but it can become very frustrating to actually do. So we do have kind of tips here of how to make that go a little bit long or a little bit better than maybe it has in the past, or to make sure that students don't kind of misuse that reading time, but that reading time actually is used in developing those comprehension skills. So sorry, these notes too small. So I have kind of these pieces here of strategies that we'll get into a little bit throughout the rest of the slides. So you'll want to create a reading culture in the classroom, not just reading tasks. So not just the instruction of to read, but to make a reading culture that's maybe shared, or maybe, you have these kind of routines to what that reading class looks like. And hopefully it gets to the point that eventually it's really fun, that the students really look forward to it. So consider shortening the time spent reading and increasing reflection and sharing time. So especially when we're thinking about those comprehension skills, and how long students are able to read for, if you've got a 45-minute block or longer, it might be one strategy to shorten the reading time to 20 minutes and then spend the rest of the time discussing the text, or doing activities with the text, or maybe even reading for 10 minutes, doing an activity, going back to it, and kind of going back and forth in that way. So after reading, you can provide individual tasks like a thinking routine that I'll get to in the next few slides, and then allow groups to discuss with their peers. Or I think, especially if you've got EAL learners, then you might want them to actually discuss first and then maybe write afterwards. It kind of depends on what outcomes you're looking at. So kind of some this and then structures allows time for teachers to use silent reading class to build relationships. So I think that it's a fantastic way to build a relationship, to ask students about a book that they're reading that they're liking, or to be able to talk to them about what they maybe would prefer in a book. So maybe a different recommendation in a book. You can also use that time to pull individual students or small groups to discuss and chat, and really a check-in, whether that has to do with reading, or it could be if you've got students in your class that are EAL, to really assess those benchmarks, or sometimes I guess unrelated things as well. On to the next slide there, please. So I have, just kidding, I've skipped a slide in my notes, but so these post-reading tasks, they can be a variety of things. They can be fun and based more on opinions. So, no right or wrong answers, just you could do something like an activity like a quick write. What's one thing your character did that you liked or didn't like, and why? And it'd be great to include some sentence frames there. Or you could draw something interesting that happened in your text to share with your group. Which is, I think, a really good strategy to really get that visualization going. I noticed in high school, a lot of kids don't visualize what they're reading. And I've had to very explicitly tell them, like, you should think about what that looks like as you're going through, because it is, I think anyways, a good strategy for remembering what you've read. Or those questions can be more like critical thinking based. So again, those thinking routines that I'll get to in the next slide. Simple theme questions. So what was the main point of what you just read? Especially if everyone's reading one article that's the same, or an activity in that realm. What was one event that stood out to you? Does a character remind you of something you know? Who and how? It could be related to pulling out things like specific evidence, like what's one line that really stood out to you. There's a lot of opportunities for different types of reflection there. And I'll go on to the next slide, which is the thinking routines that I've kind of pulled out for silent reading. You could click on each of these links. We'll send out the slides with the recording there. But if you haven't heard of thinking routines yet, they're put out through Project Zero, which is, I think, through Harvard. And they've made all these very small activities that are useful in your classroom. And I'll just push to the next slide just because it has an example of one of them. Which I think, Carrie, you're going to be talking about this in a second as well, but just to be able to show the Connect Extend challenge, it just gives you the question that you already, that you would usually need to plan out for yourself, but just these kind of broad questions of how are these ideas and information connected to what you already know, like whatever you've just read. What ideas did you get that broadened your thinking or extend it in different directions? And it doesn't have to be that students are reading the same thing. I think that it's very possible to have students reading completely different books and still telling each other about what they've just read, especially if you can kind of make it kind of a funner social activity as well. And so I will pass it on to Carrie, I believe.
Thanks.
At this point.
Yeah, and so really just adding on to what Charlie was saying is you could post these questions. So, that students had an idea of what they were reading for. Then students would read for their set time. When students stop, maybe pair them up or they pair up together, and then ask students to discuss the questions. And I just put really quickly a sentence frame on beside here on the right, but these could just be written really quickly up on the board as well. And these sentence frames, not only for EAL learners, but I know even for myself, who sometimes can be a little scattery in my thinking, when you have something that grounds you, it really allows you access into the discussion. Even though your mind might be wandering somewhere else, you now have like the structure and the form of what a correct response is going to look like. And then, students know ahead of time what they're going to be discussing. And then they've read, they've had time to think about their questions, and then they've had time to discuss, with a partner. It doesn't have to be a large group sharing, because we all know what that's like, even as an adult, to have to share in front of a whole bunch of people. But if you're just sharing in a safe space, then we have an idea, even as we're walking around, we can formatively be listening to the different ideas that students are connecting. What were the challenges that they, saw in whether they were reading an article or a short story. And just a little bit more about really the importance of sentence frames and how quick they can be, put up on the board, or maybe it's something you have in their bright space that they can access. But sentence frames, or, a starter, they're not just for writing. They also should be accessed during speaking activities and discussions. So when adding a thinking routine for students to participate in after their silent reading time, give access to sentence starters or frames to help students meaningfully engage in the talk activity with a partner. These sentence frames will provide that scaffold that allows students to focus on content rather than struggling with those language mechanics. They give access to all students into the conversation or writing activity, providing a structure to responding to questions. And by providing a starting point, sentence frames can decrease that anxiety and ensure all students feel included in that learning community. And lastly, sentence frames are tools that allow students to build on each other's ideas as well, increasing the depth of those really academic discussions that we want students to have. And so here, and if you click on the link above, these are some sample speaking and writing frames that support academic language. And these were taken from some of our teaching and learning consultants. And here's some even more. So if you click on those links, you'll see them. And it's important for also students to know the expectations during these classes. So expectations could include some of these, or you may alter them depending on the class that you have. But, students should select a book that interests them and it's at an appropriate reading level for them. And then for students to know that, during this time, they're reading quietly and they're focusing on their own reading without talking or disturbing others, and remaining engaged in their reading for that selected amount of time. And again, we all know we've had different classes where that amount of time might be greater or might be less. And that's where you can work that out as you're establishing your own routine. And for kids, encourage students to actively read and think about what they're reading. So, those thinking routines, I know we really encourage you to check them out. And so then those questions are given to students prior to their reading, and then they'll know what their kind of conversations they're going to be engaging with afterwards. And just some of those benefits of, students talking about their learning, whether they are EAL or not, it really allows students to use their strengths to access new information. It increases student engagement because they're not just sitting and reading for long periods of time. It also allows us as teachers to easily gather formative assessments, promoting, again, that academic dialogue and then writing. And it provides some processing time, which improves student output. And so we also want to model those reading habits. So students should be encouraged to develop positive reading habits, such as reading regularly and for pleasure. And not only are there expectations for our students, but there's definitely expectations for us as well if we're going to establish a solid silent reading routine, but also then that culture as well. And when you're establishing it, it's really important, and I know Charlie mentioned this earlier, is that teachers should also be reading during this silent reading time, not only to model it, but demonstrating that, you know, reading is important to all of us. And again, this will help foster that love of reading and provide guidance. So many of us know that a lot of our students will want to choose novels that are not at an appropriate reading level for them. So really guiding students in selecting appropriate books and offering suggestions. And if you're unsure, you know, asking your school librarian as well, because they are a great source of knowledge and expertise when it comes to the different levels of books and interests. And this time is a great time to check in with students. So not just say using that time to be working on something else, but we can be observing students, checking in with them or in small groups. And you know, fostering that positive reading environment. I know management wise, it makes sense to have all kids sitting in their desk, but I think to myself, when I am enjoying reading a good book, I'm not normally sitting up straight, you know, at my kitchen chair always. You know, I might be on the floor and I might be curled up somewhere. And so just working on that expectation that they would be able to do those things and then having some clear guidelines for them with that. And again, teachers can use silent reading time to work with small groups or to offer individual support to students. And then that kind of carries on with these management strategies. And so really important, especially when you're establishing this routine, is to model it, reading with students. And when they get to the talk portion, because students aren't always used to um, taking part actively when they have been questioned. So when you ask them a question, they say, I don't know, or it's one word answers, is don't give up. Posting a sentence frame can definitely allow students that time to process so they can answer the questions and prompt them when they're unsure. And if possible, do not use that whole class to silently read. So our hope would be if you were able to break your time into maybe do some talking, then some reading and a little more talking. And when we say talking, not just putting kids out into the world and talking, because we know what will happen there, but having
Mhm.
some structured talk. Thinking about, I also just wrote in this book that is excellent as well. It's by Nancy Motley, and it's called Talk, Read, Talk, Write. And it really gives some structure to including, you know, more structured student talk during lessons. Include opportunities for kids to talk about their learning, you know, through using those reading routines, making it a social experience, and knowing that there is going to be some trial and error of structure, because what might work in one of my classes definitely didn't work with all classes. So just know there will be a little bit of trial and error as you are practicing, and avoiding that punishment and rewards. Um, Thinking about page goals, could we consider, you know, how we could address the goal could be to enjoy reading, get excited, encouraging that love of reading, lots of reflection. So talking about your own reading as a skill when students say, I don't, you know, I don't like reading, it's not for me, or if their parents say that during, you know, our talk with them, is, you know, we do have to read in life. And here are some, you know, places when you go to get a loan or if you go to sign a work contract, we really want to be able to share that there is skill involved and that it is needed as they move into, you know, their life as adults. And I think it's, again, once you know what your expectations are, is to discuss and post those expectations so that kids really are aware of, you know, what is their responsibility during this time. And I'll just turn it over to our expert over at IMC.
Sure. And I will just say also that I think it's also important to remember, like wherever you are in your teaching career, like I wouldn't say that like that there's one set of routines or one set of
Mhm.
rules, or that trial and error is going to be like within one school year you're going to figure it out, you know. Like I think that it is honestly a very hard task to create this reading culture, and it probably will take a few years honestly. Like I think that that's a reasonable expectation, that it's not going to go necessarily well every year, and that it is a very I don't know, nuanced skill to be able to get the kids to really enjoy that reading time. So that's all to say that this all is like nice, fun, very quick hitters, I guess. But that I would say that if you're looking to encourage students to silent read, it's probably like a long-term goal in your teaching career, if that's especially if you're early on. So yeah, I just wanted to share also just some resources from IMC. I was going to include some pictures, but there's just quite a bit actually. So I'll just kind of include the general things. And if you are interested in any of them, please feel free to talk to me or your librarian. We'll both have very detailed information of how to find them, how to select them, what's right for what level, etc. So we do have some literature circle kits, and you don't necessarily have to use them for literature circles. So you could have them as classroom reading and have kids have discussions about their literature, you know, like that they do have books in common without doing the literary luminary and all those things, right? They could just be, we meet up on Fridays to talk about which book we're reading, right? We have some quick read book sets, so some kind of high-low readers. We've got them for different age levels. So if you do have a class that's got some reading skills to be developed, we can definitely point you in that direction as well. There's other book sets, sometimes based on a theme. So some of them are just like kind of random ones. We also have just like a whole bunch of books that could be put together for literature circles, but you could also just be taking one or two of each for your group. So and of course, you should have lots of novels in your library too. But I know sometimes it's nice to get some recommendations, or to start off with something like literature circles, or literature circle kits, I guess. Those books just to get things going. We also have, I'm sure, lots of recommendations. You can email our typical IMC mailbox. It's imc@cssd.ab.ca. Very easy to remember. And I've got facilitators who would love to recommend books. I'm happy to recommend books, but yeah, there's a whole team of us. So, and I did just add this very last minute on my TBR list, my to be read. There's a book called Just Read It that I've been meaning to read for probably a year now, and it's got some really cool activities. So I've heard of those kind of post activities for students, and I think it's for middle school to high school, but I could be wrong there, and I just wanted to include it as something that you could put on your TBR too. And if you read it before me, let me know how it goes. And so we'll go to the next slide there, which is just our thank you. Thank you for attending. And it was great to have a pretty decent turnout, honestly, today. So yeah, thanks for joining us. And we can pause our recording and move on to any questions if there are any, or if you just need to leave and you're driving somewhere, that's also